humid Louisiana air hung heavy, thick with the scent of magnolias and damp earth. The old plantation house, now a sprawling bed and breakfast, creaked and sighed in the afternoon heat, a silence settling over it that felt both peaceful and unsettling. It was a rare quiet moment, the guests mostly out exploring the surrounding bayous, leaving only me and my childhood friend, Julian. Julian had come to visit for the summer, a much-needed escape from his hectic life as a software engineer in Silicon Valley. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since he'd left our small Louisiana town after high school, chasing dreams of coding and innovation. He'd always been the ambitious one, the dreamer, while I, Elias, had stayed behind, content with the familiar rhythms of our small-town life. Working as a local historian, Julian had changed. The lanky, awkward teenager was now a confident, sharply dressed man, his eyes holding a depth and intensity one hadn't remembered. His laughter, once a nervous giggle, was now a rich, resonant sound that sent unexpected shivers down my spine. We spent the first few days catching up, reminiscing about our childhood adventures, exploring the familiar haunts of our youth. We'd spent countless hours together as kids, exploring the bayous, building forts in the woods, sharing secrets under the vast Louisiana sky. But something felt different now. The easy camaraderie of our childhood was tinged with a new, unfamiliar tension, a subtle undercurrent of something I couldn't quite name. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone on the wide, wraparound porch, the only sound the gentle hum of cicadas in the surrounding trees. Julian was leaning against the railing, gazing out at the sprawling grounds, a thoughtful expression on his face. I sat in a nearby rocking chair, watching him, a strange mix of familiarity and fascination swirling within me. He turned to me suddenly, his eyes meeting mine. "Remember that time we got lost in the bayou?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. I laughed, the memory vivid in my mind. We'd been 12, exploring a part of the bayou we'd never ventured into before, and we'd gotten hopelessly lost, spending hours wandering through the dense vegetation, the sun slowly sinking below the horizon. "I thought we were going to be eaten by alligators," I said, shaking my head. "I was more worried about your mom," Julian replied, his laughter echoing across the porch. "She was furious." We spent the next hour reminiscing about our childhood escapades, the laughter easing the underlying tension that had been building between us. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, the atmosphere shifted. Julian moved from the railing and sat in the rocking chair opposite me, the distance between us suddenly feeling significant. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and a silence fell between us, a silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. "Elias," he began, his voice low and hesitant, "there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." My heart pounded in my chest. I knew, somehow, what was coming. I'd felt it in the way he'd been looking at me, in the way his hand had brushed against mine earlier that day, a touch that had sent a jolt of electricity through me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the wooden floorboards. "I know this is going to sound strange," he said, "but I feel like things are different between us now." I nodded slowly, my throat suddenly dry. "I mean," he continued, "we're not kids anymore. We've both changed." I looked at him, taking in the changes in his face, the lines of maturity etched around his eyes, the way his shoulders had broadened. He was right. We weren't the same boys who used to explore the bayou together. "I've been thinking a lot about our friendship," he said, his voice trailing off, "and I've realized I feel something more than just friendship for you, Elias." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. The crickets chirped louder, the only sound breaking the silence that followed. I felt a rush of heat flood my face, a mixture of confusion and something else, something that felt dangerously close to recognition. Julian, I began, my voice trembling slightly. I know, he interrupted, his voice soft. It's probably the last thing you expected to hear. And I don't expect you to feel the same way. I needed you to know. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. I've been trying to ignore it, he said, trying to convince myself it's just because we haven't seen each other in so long. But it's not. It's been there, Elias, for a long time. The silence returned, even heavier than before. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, the unspoken implications hanging in the air. What are you saying, Julian? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely audible. He took another deep breath, his gaze locking onto mine. I'm saying, he whispered, that I'm in love with you, Elias. The words echoed in the stillness of the evening, sending a shockwave through me. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my mind reeling. This was not how I expected our reunion to go. I know it's complicated, Julian continued, his voice laced with uncertainty. We're cousins. And I know you probably don't feel the same way. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a strange, unsettling flicker of something else. I had to tell you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. He looked away, his gaze falling to his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to find the right words to say. But there were no right words. There was no easy way to respond to such a confession. Julian, I began, my voice soft. I don't know what to say. He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on his hands. I didn't expect you to, he said quietly. The silence stretched on, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. I could feel the weight of the unspoken hanging between us, the complex web of emotions that had suddenly been laid bare. I've been thinking about this for a long time, Julian said, breaking the silence. Ever since we were kids. I know it's different now. We're older. Things have changed. He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. But those feelings, they haven't gone away. They've only gotten stronger. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the truth of his words resonating within me, a deep, unsettling echo of my own unspoken feelings. I know this changes everything, he said, his voice barely audible. And I'm terrified of losing you, Elias. You're my best friend. You're family. He paused, taking a shaky breath. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend that I don't feel this way. I looked at him, my mind racing, trying to reconcile the familiar image of my childhood friend with the man sitting before me, a man who had just confessed his love for me. I don't want to lose you either, Julian, I said, my voice soft. You're important to me. You always have been. He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Then, what do we do? He asked. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what we were supposed to do. This was uncharted territory, a place we'd never ventured into before. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. I understand, he said quietly. The silence returned, but this time, it felt different. It was a silence filled with understanding, with unspoken promises, with the weight of the unknown. As the days that followed turned into weeks, the tension between us remained, but it began to shift, to morph into something else. It was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface of our conversations, but it was now tinged with a new awareness, a shared secret that bound us together in a way we'd never been bound before. We started spending more time alone, finding excuses to escape the other guests at the bed and breakfast. We'd take long walks through the bayous, the silence between us no longer awkward but comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. We'd sit on the porch late into the night, talking about everything and nothing, the weight of our secret hanging heavy in the air. One evening, we found ourselves in the old library, a room filled with the scent of aged paper and leather-bound books. Julian was browsing the shelves, his fingers trailing along the spines, while I sat by the window, watching the moonlight filter through the ancient oak trees outside. He turned to me suddenly, a book in his hand. "Remember this one?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. It was a collection of Louisiana folklore, a book we'd spent countless hours reading as children, captivated by the tales of ghosts and mythical creatures that roamed the bayous. I smiled, the memory bringing a wave of nostalgia. "I remember you used to be terrified of the rougarou," I said, teasingly. Julian chuckled, shaking his head. "I was not," he protested, though a hint of a smile betrayed him. He sat down beside me on the window seat, the book resting on his lap. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was a comfortable silence, a silence filled with shared memories and unspoken emotions. Julian turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. "Elias," he began, his voice low and soft, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "About what I said, about how I feel," he continued. "I know it's a lot to take in, and I don't want to pressure you. But," he paused, taking a deep breath, "I need to know, do you feel anything? Anything at all?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. I looked at Julian, his eyes searching mine, and I knew I couldn't avoid the truth any longer. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I do." A flicker of relief crossed Julian's face, followed by a look of intense emotion. What do you feel?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. I hesitated, struggling to find the words to express the complex emotions swirling within me. I don't know," I finally managed to say. "It's confusing. I've never felt this way about anyone before, especially about you." Julian nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I know," he said softly. "It's the same for me." He reached out, his hand gently cupping my cheek. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. "But it feels right," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Doesn't it?" I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch, the warmth of his hand against my skin sending a wave of warmth through me. "Yes," I whispered back, "it does." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken desire, the air between us thick with anticipation. Julian leaned in closer, his breath warm against my face. I could feel the rapid beat of his heart, mirroring my own. He paused, his eyes searching mine, as if seeking permission. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. His lips met mine, a soft, tentative touch that quickly deepened into a passionate kiss. The world around us seemed to fade away. The only thing that mattered was the feel of Julian's lips on mine, the warmth of his body pressed against mine. The kiss lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings we'd both been trying to suppress for so long. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our eyes locked on each other. Julian began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I interrupted softly, placing a finger to his lips. "Don't say anything." He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. We didn't need words. The kiss had said everything. Over the next few days, we navigated this new territory with a mixture of caution and excitement. We spent every moment we could together, exploring the complex emotions that had suddenly surfaced between us. We talked for hours, sharing our fears, our hopes, our dreams. We knew it was complicated. We knew there were obstacles in our way. But we also knew that what we felt for each other was real and that it was worth fighting for. One evening, we were sitting on the porch again, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Julian turned to me, a serious expression on his face. "Elias," he said, "I know this isn't easy, and I know there are things we need to figure out, but I want to be with you. I want to explore this, whatever this is." I looked at him, my heart swelling with emotion. "I want that too, Julian," I said softly. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "Then, what do we do?" he asked. I smiled, a sense of peace washing over me. "We take it one step at a time," I said, "just like we always have." We spent the rest of the summer together, exploring our newfound connection, navigating the complexities of our relationship. We kept our secret close, sharing it with no one, knowing that the world wouldn't understand. As the summer drew to a close, and it was time for Julian to return to California, a sense of melancholy settled over us. We knew that distance would make things difficult, but we also knew that what we had was worth fighting for. "I'll come back," Julian promised, as we stood on the porch, saying our goodbyes. "I'll come back as soon as I can." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I'll be waiting," I whispered. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, tender kiss that promised a future together. As he drove away, I watched his car disappear down the long driveway, a sense of both sadness and hope filling my heart. The following months were filled with phone calls, emails, and late-night video chats. We talked about everything, sharing our lives, our hopes, our fears. The distance was hard, but it also gave us time to reflect on what we had, to solidify the bond that had formed between us. Then, one day, Julian called with some news. He'd been offered a new job, a remote position that would allow him to work from anywhere. He was moving back to Louisiana. I couldn't believe it. I felt a surge of joy flood through me, a sense of relief that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. A few weeks later, Julian arrived back in town, his car packed with his belongings. He pulled up to the bed and breakfast, and as he stepped out of the car, our eyes met. The years melted away, the distance disappeared, and we were just two boys again, standing on the porch of the old plantation house, the Louisiana sun warming our faces. He walked towards me, a slow smile spreading across his face, and as he reached out and took my hand, I knew that we'd finally found our way home. We didn't need words. The years of shared history, the summer of whispered confessions and stolen kisses, the months of longing and anticipation, it all culminated in that simple touch. We would face whatever the future held, together, one step at a time.